Welcome to Off Panel. Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is an author, writer on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and more importantly to comic book fans, the writer of the upcoming Valiant High at Valiant Comics. It's Daniel Kibblesmith. Thanks for coming on, Daniel.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, you have a lot of interesting things that I'd love to talk to you about, and one of the main things I want to talk to you about is Valiant High, but I want to talk to you. I want to ask you about comics in general instead, because I know you honestly mostly from, a combination of Clickhole and Twitter. And
Sure.
And I kind of want to know about your comic book origin story. Like, when did you first get into comics, and what was it about them that you like so much?
Let's see. So it would have been as a kid via my dad's collection. But I didn't take to them immediately. I think, when I was I'm in my 30s, and when I was real little, it would have been around the time that like the Superman movies were a thing, and like the Ruby Spears Superman cartoon was on TV. So I knew about the characters, but in the same way that I would know about like Mickey Mouse or Kermit the Frog.
Sure.
I knew about them as like pop culture icons, and had like Burger King toys and that kind of thing. And then it wasn't until my dad loved comic books, but I think I was sort of like looking for my own identity as a kid, and really latched more onto video games. And it wasn't until we went to the video arcade when I was closer to like 9 or 10 and saw the big wraparound X-Men game.
Yeah.
Which I have to imagine that this isn't the only comic book origin story that involves the 6-person X-Men arcade game. But I kind of knew who the X-Men were, just from being in a house that had comic books in it. But I saw, for the first time, and I was old enough to kind of understand and like start latching onto like the geeky minutia. Like I saw characters who were not Batman and Superman. Like I saw Nightcrawler for the first time.
Yeah.
And it seems so quaint now, but it really did blow my mind, because they were the sort of gateway to like a stranger, more complex universe that I could start sort of exploring, and that would feel at that age like it belonged to me. So I ended up kind of exploring my dad's collection of Silver Age comics, and then that combined with Batman the Animated Series would have come out at around the same time. Batman the Animated Series, the X-Men cartoon, the Tick, which was equally important for my comedy writing career.
Yeah.
I think that was some early exposure to satire. Once all of that kind of hit at once, and I was just off to the races. And I wanted to read everything we had and know everything. But my dad was still buying comics. He'd just buying newsstand comics when I was growing up, and I wasn't interested. It wasn't until the gateway drug of video games, the thing that I sort of thought of as my thing, also brought in like licensed properties, and then I fell in love with Nightcrawler. I mean, it's still certainly my favorite X-Men. I'm going to say objectively the best X-Men, but it's early.
I honestly would say he's objectively like he's the most full manifestation of the spirit of the X-Men, I think. And honestly, like your story is a very common one. I actually the thing for me is it was a combination of the X-Men arcade game, the animated series for X-Men and Batman, and also the old Marvel Universe trading cards. I was
sure, yeah,
that was kind of like Wikipedia for me, because I had it seemed like insurmountable to try to get into the X-Men, but playing as Nightcrawler in that game and bouncing around everywhere when you use this special and everything, and then like looking at the back of one of the cards and reading about the fact he's Kurt Wagner and all these things like that, and it's funny how those things are so important. And you look back and they're, like you said, they're kind of quaint and everything, but they kind of form your fandom in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was never a trading cards guy, but a lot of my friends were, and it wasn't until maybe the Marvel Overpower game, because we all played Magic the Gathering at around the same age. No offense to adults who still play Magic the Gathering. My understanding is that it's bigger than ever, but I did not keep up. But I loved comic books, so we also got the Marvel Overpower cards. And yeah, I think you are still right about X-Men being basically impenetrable.
Yeah.
It's just that it's just, we all make it down deeper, different levels of that strata. You know,
Hmm.
some people make it farther than others.
One of my favorite things is after going to see one of the Marvel movies or like an X-Men movie or something like that, my wife, who loves them and just thinks they're fantastic, she'll start Googling things and she'll ask me questions about like I'm trying to think of a good example. She started asking me about the Scarlet Witch because she was reading the Scarlet Witch's like Wikipedia page, and she's like, "What is this?" And it was
Yeah,
just
that's a real rabbit hole.
it is. She's like, she got married to the Vision. I'm like, that is not even the tip of the iceberg, darling. uh, but yeah, I mean, it is kind of interesting how like all the different gateways that people can get into comics, because even back then there was all kinds of different media you could pick up for them, because it's like trading cards or arcades or whatever. But you're obviously a super busy guy these days with the Late Show, and
No.
well, I mean,
What?
I presume
No.
I presume your day to day life is constantly reading and watching the news just so you can like be ready for the job. But do you still have time for reading comics? Is that still a part of your not maybe daily life, but what comics are you digging these days?
Yeah, it's a nights and weekends thing. It's before bed. It's on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy a lot. I have the Marvel Unlimited subscription and I have the
Yes.
Comixology Unlimited subscription, and they're both incredible lifesavers. And I tend to keep up with creators I know I really like, or characters where I'll, kind of always be on board to see a new take on them. I mean, I'm sure your listeners already know this, but The Vision
Mm-hmm.
was such a profound experience. Like I haven't felt that way since maybe because as a kid, I kind of fell off of superhero comics in the mid to late '90s, which is the other part of that story. That
Mm-hmm.
the titles I was subscribing to, like Amazing Spider-Man, kind of got mired down in the Clone Saga, and I loved because of Nightcrawler, I loved Excalibur,
Mm-hmm.
and one day Age of Apocalypse happened, and I went to the local comic shop, but I didn't go often enough to know that Age of Apocalypse was coming.
Oh
So
yeah.
one day my issue of Excalibur became X hyphen Calibre,
Yeah.
and I said, no, 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 no. What has happened? So I kind of fell off superhero comics during the '90s, bubble and burst, and then came back to it in college when I had a projectionist job, and a friend of mine at the theater had a huge pile of like Vertigo books
Mm-hmm.
and Alan Moore Swamp Thing and Sandman and everything Frank Miller and all of the stuff that I would have missed, all of the kind of post Watchmen stuff that I didn't know about growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what brought me back.
Right.
And Tom King's vision felt like coming back to comics again in the same way, where I couldn't believe how '90s Vertigo it was
Mm-hmm.
without without being about a difficult, angry white man. Which is something that I've realized probably spoke to me a lot more in college than it does right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean that is definitely one of the ones that is kind of it speaks to people just because of how different Tom handled everything like with that, and obviously having people like Gabriel Hernandez Walta and like Jordi Belair on it was incredible as well. But man, like I had Tom on my podcast, and I remember asking him, I was like, "Do you hate the Vision?" Because because it's just like, I don't know, I felt so bad for the guy. I mean, I guess I maybe wouldn't necessarily feel bad for him because he is a synthetic man and maybe he doesn't have full emotions and everything like that. I guess he did prove to in the series, but I felt really funny asking Tom that, but it felt like a fair question after reading that series. Um,
Certainly, like going into it, like I could see someone who didn't like Vision starting to write that story. By the end of it, I don't know that I felt as a reader that he hated him
No.
as much as he were like, these are tools that I have at my disposal to tell a story that was there the entire time,
Hmm.
which is I think what made it feel so kind of old Alan Moore to me, is just that sort of putting the pieces together in a new way.
Hmm.
Uh, Somebody who had obviously done their homework and just skewing it ever so slightly.
Well, I mean, it's listening to your history. It sounds like we actually have a pretty similar history in terms of how we got into comics and in reading. And one of the big things that popped up during that, your prime days of your childhood and teen years and everything like that, was the original Valiant universe. I'm curious, like, what kind of familiarity did you have with the Valiant universe, both from the '90s books and today, before jumping into Valiant High?
So for the original Valiant universe, I was aware that it existed because I would get like the previews style flyers
Sure.
at my local comic book store. Shout outs to One Stop Comics in Oak Park, Illinois, um, which is still very much there and worth a visit. So I kind of knew that it was a thing,
Right.
but at the same time, there were a lot of like imprints and offshoots coming at me like Fast and Furious, and I honestly had just gotten back into it. I mean, I didn't even really read DC. Like,
Hmm.
I think I just read like three Marvel titles, and then knew a lot of the minutia from like Silver Age comics and from like handbooks to the Marvel Universe kind of thing.
Hmm.
Kind of the same role, I guess, the trading cards filled for a lot of people. So I wasn't really aware of Valiant the first time around. The new Valiant, I loved immediately. I became friends with a one-time Marvel associate editor and then Valiant editor Alejandro Arbona,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and yeah, great guy. And so we just became internet friends, and then we started hanging out when I lived in Chicago, and he was freelancing and traveling. And when he moved over to Valiant, he knew that I was interested in writing comics, and he started giving me humor assignments.
Hmm.
So I have a couple pages in some of the anniversary issues. In Bloodshot 25, I have some like fake ads,
Hmm.
and then when it became time for Unity 25, he put together an all humor issue
Hmm.
with a lot of really amazing people in it. Other TV writers are in there. Michael Kupperman, the cartoonist, is in there, and so he gave me basically everything that was out. Like, he just put paperbacks in my hands and hardcover deluxe editions,
Hmm.
and let me just kind of familiarize myself. Because we were friends and I love comics, but also because I was interested in writing for them at some point. And I also knew of James Asmus,
Hmm.
was a friend of a friend, and now I know him because he used to do comedy in Chicago. So I knew that Quantum and Woody was a comic, and I knew that a friend of a friend was writing it. I thought this sounds really interesting. I would like to know more about this.
Hmm.
And Quantum and Woody ended up not really painting a full picture of the Valiant universe. Uh,
Not entirely, but it is a
they're kind of on
part of
their
it.
own little tear, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was part of the pile that Alejandro dumped on me. And since then, I've been able to keep up because that's Valiant's kind of MO, is that they try to do a lot of like narrower line, high quality, accessible to new readers. That's sort of what makes them easy to get into and easy to follow. So I wasn't an original Valiant fan, but I thought they did a really great job bringing back the line. And everybody over there, like, obviously, they were fans the entire time, which is, I
Yeah.
think, is what makes it work.
Yeah, and one of the things, like you were speaking to, how they kind of redid the line and everything like that. One thing I think that they've done a really good job of is not letting it get to the point. And this is coming from a place of love because I'm a lifelong X-Men fan. But it does become quite the tapestry. It becomes a tapestry that's you almost need to have like a doctorate to understand every relationship in the X-Men. But you can pick up something like Divinity or like Quantum and Woody and have a pretty good grasp on it if you just find like the number one or even like the beginning of an arc. And that is they have cleverly designed that, and it's nice that they do those, like the all humor issue for Unity and everything. Not typically a book I would think of purely as humor, but it worked for it.
Yeah, not typically, but I think that's what made it so fun is that it is a high stakes end of the world, and it's the Valiant universe too. So like real cities are getting destroyed.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, God, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was oh God, what was the arc? It was the one where Ginger came, and I know you did the one page, the spread for I think it was in Unity 25.
It was, yeah.
But there was the when Ginger came, and it was Harbinger. Was it Harbinger Wars? No, it was
I think it was Armor
Armor
Hunters,
Hunters.
or
Yes, that
yeah.
one. Yeah, so like Mexico City was destroyed in that, and there are real stakes, but it's. I think it's interesting how they find both a way to do real stakes type storytelling like that, but then, let's talk about Valiant High. I mean, for the listeners who don't know about it, it's a new book you're doing at Valiant with artist Derek Charm that had, its first issue is dropping in February, which is, we're recording before it was released. But it's a high school reimagining of Valiant Comics that I honestly, I didn't know. I knew I liked your stuff. I knew I liked Derek's stuff, but I didn't really know what to expect from it. But it's the Valiant Comics high school comedy I never knew I always wanted.
Well, thank you.
but the interesting thing is like, you're saying you didn't have a lot of background. You just kind of had a lot of stuff dropped onto you by Alejandro, and you started figuring things out. But I don't think you can really do the comedy that you're doing in that's all so character based without having a pretty heavy awareness of what makes these characters tick. Did you feel like you really need to do a lot of research to, find the right roles for all these characters, or did you have a pretty good grasp pretty much right off the bat?
Well, sure. I mean, it's kind of a yes and no because I did get a lot of stuff dropped on me all at once, but that was in like 2013,
Sure,
something like that. So I've been able to kind of let it decompress a little bit. So I felt like I had a really good handle on the characters, at least in as far as like boiling them down into an archetype and then seeing like where that clicks in the jigsaw puzzle of high school cliches.
sure.
Yeah, I think most of the research was done just as a fan,
Mm-hmm.
and then once Valiant High was actually brought to me, it wasn't my concept. It was brought to me by also then Valiant editor Tom Brennan.
Mm-hmm.
Who now I believe works for the city of New York for the mayor's office, and he's a superhero in real life.
Oh wow!
So yeah, great guy, and very worth following everything that he does. But he asked me because he couldn't really reveal what it was yet until they had people attached to it. So he asked me if I was interested in teen drama / romance.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I replied like in all caps, like Archie? Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. And the answer was like, yeah, kind of, because we got the artist who does Jughead.
Right.
So I think it was a lot of research that I had done just as a fan, just like familiarizing myself with the Valiant universe. And then because high school stories, and especially like high school alternate universe stories, it's sort of a game, you kind of want to imagine who fits where. And there's a very like fan fiction-y aspect to it.
Sure.
Where as soon as I figured out that, Exo Manowar is a armor-based superhero who literally wears a helmet and shoulder pads,
Mm-hmm.
making him a running back on the football team, you get to do these kind of like punny, Easter eggy, kind of fan servicey things, but they also just, they also feel right.
Right.
Hopefully, I think they all click. So the archetypes of high school cartoons and high school comics are I think pretty well established. So once I started thinking about it in those terms, it was more like just the floodgates opening.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ninjak is debonair and he is always operating at peak confidence. And he's mysterious and well-traveled, so we make him a foreign exchange student
Mm-hmm.
who has these kind of like ill-explained backstory and a lot of, mysterious martial arts skills from his, shadowy past, and things like that. Like I think it was the suggestion that Bloodshot be the gym teacher,
Mm-hmm.
predated my involvement with the book, but is completely brilliant.
Yeah, it's perfect.
The other part of that game is figuring out who's an authority figure and who's a student. So I think Harada was always going to be the principal, which means you get to play with the mentorship that he has with Amanda McKee, Livewire, in the
Hmm.
Prime Valiant universe. So I got to make her the focal character, which I really liked, and sort of take what is essentially like their dynamic. Like you're always looking for the sort of like core dynamics when you're adapting into say a movie or something, or
Hmm.
like an animated series. And this was kind of the same process. You're just looking for like what's the thing that you can't change, like what's the thing that makes these guys work, and then you just kind of find the high school version of it. So Faith is essentially still Faith. She's a little
Yeah.
younger, but she's the bubbly optimist and humanist. And I always say that I made Dr. Mirage a teacher because she has doctor in her name.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think she should just have some authority.
I have to admit, the biggest surprise was that Galad, the Eternal Warrior, was not the history teacher.
Oh, sure, that's fair. That would have worked too.
It definitely
Uh,
would have thrown off his relationships with his brothers, though.
yeah, a lot of it just cascades
Right.
because once you know that you need certain people in certain places, then the relationships that they have like kind of inform. Um, so I think that I always knew that I wanted to do some straight out of Harbinger stuff,
Hmm.
like where you just have Peter Sanchek be like a young sad sack.
Hmm.
She basically is in at least at least at the beginning of the Valiant Prime
Right. Right.
stories. And that's a teen superhero book, so they already have like crushes on each other. Like you
Hmm.
just kind of put them in school.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the funny things about I've talked to a lot of people about superhero comics over the years, and it's kind of the tie that binds for the comic industry, whether or not you actively read them or you don't. But a lot of times superhero comics feel like soap operas, and other times they kind of feel like super powered, I mean, not just New Mutants and everything like that, but super powered high schools, because it's all about the relationships. It's all about like the lack of communication. I mean, if you're talking about Cyclops and Wolverine leading this schism between the X-Men and everything like that, I mean, that it's a lot of it's just like philosophical differences that could even happen in high school. It's just two guys who are like leading separate gangs or something like that, like it's West Side Story. And so it actually all kind of makes sense for high school, because a lot of the stuff that happens in comics is kind of petty drama already. It's just now there's superpowers involved.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair and totally reasonable. And there's also nothing, uh, there's nothing earth-shattering about high school alternative universes. I think that's one of the reasons that it's so fun to do it for Valiant, is because other companies have done their version of it. Whether Marvel has the app, the Avengers Academy app,
Hmm.
which has lots of beautiful new designs and reimaginings, and the X-Men Evolution cartoon was a big influence on this because it's that similar process of kind of figuring out where everybody fits under slightly different circumstances, or Smallville, like to
Yeah.
people who don't really know what the Valiant universe is, or maybe don't read comics. I've said it's a lot like Smallville, where you take Superman, he's Clark Kent, he's in high school, but a lot of his villains and allies still show up, and they're just kind of filtered, through the lens of the high school genre.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's there's nothing kind of proprietary about it, and I love, especially because Valiant can be so the stakes can be very high, and like there's sometimes more violent, or there's sometimes more grounded in reality.
Hmm.
I love that Valiant decided they wanted to do a high school alternative universe, and that they hired a comedy writer to do it, because they're very good at doing grim, dark, strange comics. But they also put out like Fred Van Linte's Archer and
Oh
Armstrong
yeah.
and Quantum and Woody, which I mentioned already, and like things that are Faith obviously is incredible, and so it just like pure of heart. Like I love everything that happens in that book. Um, so I think that they totally have room for something like this, but you wouldn't necessarily think of them for it.
It is interesting though, because I actually find a lot of times my favorite books for Valiant are the more comedic ones. So it kind of makes sense that something like this would happen, because I Quantum and Woody, going back to the original series that Christopher Priest and MD Bright did back in the day. I was a huge fan of that, and like it continued on when James took it over, and I really liked Fred and Perrier and everybody else that was on Archer and Armstrong, and going into Ivar Time Walker, like that was a great series too, and. Anyways, it is kind of interesting. It's like you wouldn't think of Valiant as like a comedy, like comic zone or anything like that, but they have managed to make it work quite well. But I was curious, like when you were coming up with the gags for the characters and some of the relationships and things like that, were there any beats that you kind of just tossed right out off the bat as being too obvious or too mean spirited or anything?
Not obvious. Obvious was kind of the name of the game.
Yeah,
to be honest, because when you're doing something that like is
a send up.
Exactly. I wanted to subvert as many of the high school tropes as possible, and I hope that when people read it, especially if they read all 4 issues, they'll find out which ones we tried to turn upside down a little bit. But certainly at the beginning, I wanted it to look familiar, and I wanted it to deal with archetypes. So obvious was really helpful, like the Exo Man of War being in literal armor, like the high school equivalent of armor, and seeing the football field as a battlefield. Or making Gilad the eternal sophomore, because he gets held back so much that it becomes like a nickname that the other students give him. So I kind of loved hitting those sort of like, oh, I get it kind of beats. Anything I cut was sort of just like cut for space,
Okay.
or cut for distance from the core stories, because the other big obstacle with this is that you're adapting kind of an entire superhero universe, and you have to sort of set your own ceiling on
Sure.
it. Like I think my earliest drafts had like assistant principal Neville Alcott, like things like that, where it's like, yeah, that would have worked. But you don't need him. He's not doing anything that Harada's not doing, and you're not really giving him his due. It's just kind of an excuse to squeeze in another character.
Right.
But I'm hoping like more characters emerge throughout the series.
Sure.
So I'm really hoping that everybody's satisfied, and that they get to see, certainly that Valiant fans get to see like a version of somebody that they love, that they either respond to or, think is clever in some way. Or honestly, even if they hate it, they should talk to me. They should talk to me on Twitter, and tell me why I ruined their character by turning them into like a teenager, and they'll probably have some good points.
That actually fits stunningly well into my next question, and is probably the weirdest question I've ever asked my podcast. Mostly because it's an extremely dumb analogy, Daniel. I'm gonna be totally honest. Like I said, I have a weird analogy to make, but. So here it is. When I was in high school, my buddy and I loved this meatball sandwich in a mall food court up here I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and so we would go to this one food court and we thought it was like the best. And so we took another one of our friends there, and he had a really different take that totally ruined it for us. He said it was good, but the sauce tasted like SpaghettiOs. And so from then on, all my friend and I could taste was SpaghettiOs. So we basically had it one more time and never again, because so like bringing that thought into our mind kind of like changed the nature of the sandwich to us. And that was one thing I was kind of thinking about. Not that I was thinking about SpaghettiOs with your book, but with Valiant High, do you not want to go so far in lampooning these characters that a reader's like, wait, this character is ridiculous. Why do I like them to begin with? Or is that not really a consideration, because you are trying to be obvious with the humor and play off who the character is to begin with?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think the goal was to acknowledge the archetypes that were at the heart of the Valiant characters and the personalities and stuff, and just kind of stay true to the core of that, and then bounce them off each other in a new world. And I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. Like, it's kind of like telling a story. It's an alternate universe story.
Sure.
It's also sort of like telling a story in a dream sequence. You know what I mean? Like, when this is over, when you're done reading this, none of the core Valiant characters will be damaged or altered in any way,
Hmm.
because it just takes place in this high school bubble. So I wasn't worried about ruining anything for anybody. I was actually more just excited about, work, especially working in comedy. Like, no one can make fun of something like someone who loves it.
Right.
Like, because you know everything about it, so you sort of know like its ticks and its
Hmm.
weaknesses, and the things that you're self-deprecating about your own love for it. So yeah, no, no one makes fun of superheroes and comics at work as hard as I do, because I have the most raw material to work with.
Yeah, and plus you got the passion, and that's really necessary to do anything well, even if it is making fun of superheroes sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean, the other component of that is just that, like, the box that all of this is in is certainly like a bit of a send up.
Hmm.
But I'm hoping that all of the feelings feel real,
Hmm.
because high school is terrible. And this is definitely a book about teenage superheroes, and there's drama and mystery and fights, and romance. Um, but it's also, as much a book about just surviving high school.
Hmm.
And I tried to stay just really true to my own feelings about that, and my own memories, and how you feel when you're there,
Hmm.
and how you're sort of an adult, but everything's just out of reach. And I think that if I did a good job, it won't feel like a send up. I don't think anyone will think that I'm making fun of these characters as much as doing just another version of, people who feel real and have real feelings about the situation that they're in. I'm hoping. I'm
No,
hoping.
in the first issue, it 100% comes across like that. I actually was, because like I said, I know you mostly for your comedic writing and everything like that. I was actually kind of surprised by how well the premise works, and that's not to cast aspersions to what I might have thought about your writing or something, but I was surprised by how well the premise works just as like a straight like high school story, because they all kind of jive well together. Naturally, somebody like Torque is going to fit really well then, because he basically is like a perpetual high school bro in the comic, anyways. But like Livewire as a lead works perfectly, and I don't know. I was very impressed by how you brought it to life there. Uh,
I'm very flattered. Thank you. Yeah,
oh,
I hope people will enjoy it.
so I wanted to ask, because like I said, you have a significant experience writing humor for all kinds of other mediums. How different is writing humor for comics, where the visuals are so specifically intertwined with making it work, and like working with somebody like Derek to make sure that the visual comedic beats work just as well as the ones you're bringing into the script with dialogue.
Sure. Well, it sort of depends on the medium,
Sure.
but the one thing that they all have in common, and one thing that I think is really special about comics, as opposed to a film or TV, or stand up, or just like trying to do like a McSweeney's piece or something,
Mm-hmm.
is timing.
Yeah.
And I don't know of a medium that can manipulate timing as effectively as comics can,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of tension between you and the reader, and this sort of like agreed upon pacing, that you're both hoping that you guys are operating on the same wavelength. That, like, if you choose to do a page that's all from the same angle, or if you choose to have a panel that's silent, or a panel that's like has a word balloon, but the word balloon is silent, has like
Mm-hmm.
an ellipses or something in it. Like, you have all these like tools at your disposal that are only native to comics.
Yeah.
So the biggest difference between doing comics and writing for the Colbert Show is character driven narrative
Sure.
versus, like, telling a story where we're all the character, because we have
Mm-hmm.
to live in America right now.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I think that there's more overlap than I expected, um, and because it's all collaborative too.
Sure.
Because I write for a TV show, and I'm not delivering the jokes. And it's the same with comics. Like, I ultimately think like Derek, and the art team in general are delivering the jokes. You just have to be really clear about intent, and I think I get a lot more directorial with comics. I try to like reveal more about like their inner worlds
Mm-hmm.
to kind of cue facial acting and like emotions and like color choices and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say for TV, obviously, there's a lot more cleverness, a lot more wordplay. It's more like laugh out loud jokes. With the comics, I've found it's more like you're going on a journey with the characters, and there's definitely punchlines, but a lot of the humor comes from like having some relationship with them and like knowing or thinking how they're going to react. So yeah, it just depends on the medium. But I was surprised how similar it was because you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to go in with like strong points of view, something you're trying to say, and just pacing it out so that a joke lands.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're speaking of timing is really it is the tie that binds in all types of comedy. And like when you're talking about comics and how they work, have you ever read Preacher?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, like one of my favorite sequences in any comic ever is Hair Star trying on hats. And
yes,
and it's hilarious, and it's basically the same panel 16 times in a row, but it works so well because of the way that Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon just use panel layouts to take advantage of all the everything that is comic books as a medium, and it works so well because of panel sequences and like the reader having to look at each one and give each one like a second or two of its time. And it's so funny, but it really does again, it comes down to timing and playing off of formats. And I don't know, I think comics are a very interesting medium when it comes to comedy, and a lot of times pretty underrated. Like I love a lot of comics that just make me laugh or even just make me smile, and a lot of times you can do that just by really clever comedic timing.
yeah. I definitely agree. I think the only downside is that comedians obviously love writing dialogue,
Right.
and comics are a medium where ideally you're using less than you want to.
Sure.
Um, but on the whole, absolutely. I mean, I just revisited Quantum and Woody, the first the James Asmus rather
Mm-hmm.
volumes, and I just forgot how many sitcom style dialogue jokes
Yeah.
there are in
Mm-hmm.
it. Just the way that they talk to each other, and they do such a good job pacing it out, so they really feel like conversations, like movie scripts or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works really, really well. But I think one thing, and I'm not saying that you're Jim Lee or Jack Kirby or anything, but I kind of wondered when I was looking
I'm
through.
actually Jim Lee combined with Jack Kirby.
Oh, okay. Well, that
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
that actually makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. I
Okay,
invented the concept of timing being at the core of comedy,
that is
and
incredible.
I'm also Jim Lee meets Jack Kirby.
So you're like Daniel Kibblesmith, the eternal cartoonist.
Yeah, sure,
Okay, I like it.
sure.
I like it. But I mean, so you create your own comics you've run online, like you post them on Twitter, you have them on your site and everything like that. And I kind of reading those, they're really good examples of comic timing. They're simple comics, but they work because you have a good concept. You use like the layouts in a a smart way, and you don't overburden with. I've talked to a lot of editors who say when they talk to a new writer, they want to fill every panel with 70,000 words. They want to just load the book up with prose, basically. But you kind of have a more Spartan approach. You keep it minimalist, and it works because of that. And I don't know. I mean, I wonder if like that experience making your own comics kind of gave you a better and more realistic approach to writing a project like Valiant High.
I hope so. I personally just everybody being their own kind of worst critic. I don't think I'm there yet. Like writing the last comics projects I did before this was a creator-owned book called The Doorman
Mm-hmm.
that I co-wrote with my friend Elliot Rahal, and the all of the art is by Kendall Good. And we traded off drafts on that because it was co-written. So there was more editing built into the writing process.
Sure.
And when I read Valiant High now, I can see every subsequent issue becoming a little lighter on dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
or at least I hope it is. So part of that is the necessity of issue one being the explain everything issue.
Right.
But I think a lot of it was just me kind of letting go of the reins a little bit and not being, not wanting every like clever gag that I thought of. being in there, and not even just gags, but just like like turn of phrase, like
Sure.
or just like ramping up to things, like having those be a little too flowery for my own taste in hindsight. And I think that's another big lesson for writing for television is that time is of the essence and everything has to be really polished and really punchy. So doing my own comics, I think it's kind of a more innate uh, practical concern because I do my own lettering and the comics that I draw are also just like they're like a little more offbeat,
Hmm.
um, which is my way of saying that they're about Garfield living with Dilbert. Uh, some of them are, some of them are, and so like I kind of have different senses of humor, like different hats that I put on for those projects.
Hmm.
So those do tend to be like weird and minimalist and kind of cryptic. And then when I'm obligated to tell like a fuller story, I think I'm tempted to use a lot more words.
Hmm.
And then as I get a little more comfortable again, I see how good Derek's pages are. I reminded of how many tools we have at our disposal, and then yeah, try to keep the dialogue a little lighter. Try to remember the lessons of when I'm doing every aspect of a comic versus when I'm only doing the writing, which means I probably put more stock in it than if I could, fast forward and see what the finished project would look like.
Hmm. I actually think talking to a lot of creators who've been doing this for forever, it seems more maybe more than any medium, but really I think this is just kind of the way it is for everything. But comics is a job that you learn so much as you're doing it, and so naturally you're going to refine your process as you go through it. So I just kind of thought that doing doing the cartoons you were doing yourself kind of would help you start refining that voice to start with, even if it is just really for yourself. But so I wanted to ask, writing for the Late Show, presumably drowning in whatever the hell Trump did today or whomever.
Sorry, who?
He's this guy. Yeah, it's an
Huh.
alternate universe America, and he's actually president now. It's crazy.
That's a great
Um,
pitch.
God, yeah, it's just terrible. It feels like writing for the Late Show feels like it could come from a different place than making jokes about like Coach Bloodshot or Ninjak's desire to he's all that Peter Stanchek. So I'm curious, given that one is your day job and the other one is one you probably fit in as you can. I'm sure you kind of have a clear divider. It's not like you're sitting in the offices at the Late Show writing Valiant High or something like that. But is there a part of you that kind of feels almost refreshed by being able to tackle something like Valiant High and the pure escapism of writing something that's more silly and less reflective of the world's, relative insanity?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and not even necessarily the content of it, like not even just being not about the news or being apolitical, but just to use different storytelling muscles.
Yeah.
But then, yes, like having it not be about Donald Trump is a colossal bonus. Yeah, it's like anybody, who does multiple things. It's a day job and a night job.
Hmm.
They bleed into each other just because of the nature of inspiration.
Sure.
The thing that unites them is that I'm just playing on Twitter all of the time. So I might get excited and inspired about comic book stuff that's happening on Twitter while I'm at my day job, or I might become outraged about politics while I'm supposed to be scripting comics.
Sure.
But you just manage, keep multiple to-do lists, and when something strikes, try to just file it away until it is relevant, until it is crucial.
Hmm.
But yeah, for the most part, my day is 10 to 13 hours a day of news,
Yeah.
and talking about news and turning it into comedy. And then I love to read and write comic books. So, at night, I will read something that is just to make me happy and to keep up. And those things are incredibly inspiring, and they make me want to come up with more pitches. And there's obviously lots of existing characters I'd love to work on someday. There's creator-owned stuff I'd love to work on someday. So it's just like anybody with multiple jobs. Like you have a I'm certainly like a kind of like an always on, easily distracted person. So I don't necessarily mean to get inspired in one way or the other at any given time. But yeah, if I just see like a shiny object, sometimes it'll take some discipline to say like, okay, well that's a later thing. That's
Mm.
a
No wonder why you like Twitter. It's a blessing and a curse for people like you and me. I'm the same way,
every
absolutely.
stupid thought. Yeah, right to the world. You're welcome.
Well, yeah, it is.
Blade is more important than Star Wars. Send.
Did you say Blade?
I did.
Oh my God, that is amazing. I don't know if I even disagree. It's glorious. It's glorious. One has Wesley
let
Snipes.
history decide.
But yeah, no, I mean it is just kind of interesting. I remember reading or hearing on a podcast back in like October where I heard somebody suggest, having a Trump presidency would actually be better for late night than than Hillary's. And I'm just like, sometimes I feel like maybe we shouldn't have tested that out to find out that to be true.
It's not
But
the ideal way.
no, it's like, okay, let's actually do some actual empirical testing on whether or not this theory is true. Yes, it is excellent for late night, but good God, I wish we could stop talking about it.
This was also something that I said on Twitter, so forgive me for self-plagiarizing, but the analogy I keep using is that Trump is good for comedy the way that a bus accident is good for an emergency room.
Right.
Like if you think the goal is to just churn through as much horror as possible,
Right.
If you hit a rich vein of stuff that you can make jokes about, you can make a lot of jokes about it. But those jokes are maybe going to be, at least on some level, a coping mechanism.
Yes.
For how bad things could potentially get for some of the people watching. So yeah, it's great for late night being valuable.
Right.
It's bad for creating a world where late night needs to be really valuable.
Right. Yeah. No.
Yeah, we do what we do. My fiance went to a college that I don't fully understand, where she just read all of the Western canon in like learned ancient Greek. And she told me that I think it was Aristotle says, and I'm butchering this and paraphrasing, so everybody go wiki it, but that the meaning of life is where your skills meet the world's needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was at the inauguration where Mr. Colbert shook the hand of every writer in the room and said, "Well, if you were wondering why you had this job, this is it."
Yeah. No, and it is interesting. Like, I'm not saying that like writing comics is a coping mechanism for you, but it's nice to have escapism. And like, there's plenty of things that we have to pay attention to. Like, but at the same time, it is nice to have a world to escape into, like Valiant High. For me, I have to admit, I've been rewatching Parks and Recreation because I like to think of a world where the government likes to take care of people. But
Well, I wholly endorse that.
yes, it is a glorious thing to do. I have just one last question for you, though. I want to bring it back to comics, though, to finish it up. You're clearly an impassioned comic fan. You're enjoying your time writing about comics. Do you see yourself tackling comics going forward for the foreseeable future? And I was, this kind of stems from the fact that, do you know who Chip Zdarsky is?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so Chip is an amazing writer and he's an amazing artist and I love his stuff. But I had this weird idea and then he tweeted about it hilariously enough, so I feel like he may have been reading my mind, of the idea of Chip Zdarsky writing an event comic and how weird that would be, like doing Chip Zdarsky's Age of Apocalypse. Could you ever see yourself becoming, a Daniel Kibblesmith, writer of the next Secret Wars or the next Civil War or something like that? Is that something you could see for yourself?
Oh, sure. I mean, I would flatter myself to think so. I mean, I would love to. Like the sort of I'm kind of just a busybody in general. Like I've always had, no matter where I was working, I've always had projects going on, and it's not necessarily like with a career change in mind. It's just that am interested in trying to do different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to film school, which is kind of the unifying, the bridge between writing comedy professionally and doing something like a big blockbuster event comic.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've always wanted to tell different kinds of story, and comedy was something that I really liked, and especially when I was beginning my career, it was something that you could do in short form,
Mm-hmm.
that you could actually get people to listen to. But I would, yeah, if I had time, I would absolutely love to do something like that, or to do work with other superheroes, or do something in the Valiant universe that wasn't that was in continuity.
Mm-hmm.
I'd as a fan, as a writer, I think on every level I'd be kind of up for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all artistic outlets for me that I'd like to keep getting better at, and that also selfishly help me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like having a platform to talk about what's going on in news and politics is a tremendously therapeutic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every artist feels that like getting to reach more people the way that you would with an event comic, and like weave themes that you care about into something that's going to get more eyeballs on it is, yeah, absolutely a highly desirable thing. And I would read Chip Zdarsky's Secret Wars in a second.
I would too.
I am already envisioning a huge role for Howard the Duck.
Oh God. Oh man. I want that. His Howard the Duck series was great.
Yeah, really fantastic.
Yeah. Well, that's actually all I have for you, Daniel. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Daniel Kibblesmith. You can find Daniel on Twitter at @Kibblesmith, on his website at kibblesmith.com, and his work in Valiant High from Valiant Comics. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.